Gaza-Israel conflict timeline. Beginning of conflict, 2006. Large-scale conventional warfare beyond the peripheries of the Gaza Strip began when Palestinian militants abducted Corporal Gilad Shalit, and Israel responded by launching Operation Summer Rains on June 28, 2006. The operation became the first major mobilization within the Gaza Strip since Israel unilaterally disengaged from the region between August and September 2005. The Gaza Beach Blast was an event on June 9, 2006 in which 8 Palestinians were killed, including nearly the entire family of 7-year-old Huda Galea, and at least 30 others were injured in an explosion on a beach near the municipality of Beit Lahia in the Gaza Strip. The incident received considerable attention from news media worldwide, with blame for the explosion hotly disputed in the following weeks. Israel maintains that it mobilized thousands of troops in order to suppress Qassam rocket fire against its civilian population and to secure the release of Gilad Shalit. It is estimated that between 7,000 and 9,000 Israeli artillery shells were fired into Gaza between September 2005 and June 2006, killing 80 Palestinians in 6 months. On the Palestinian side, over 1,300 Qassam rockets have been fired into Israel from September 2000 to December 21, 2006. Israeli forces also continued to search for underground tunnels, used by militants to smuggle weapons, as well as monitor operations at checkpoints, with some assistance from the European Union at Rafah, for security reasons, specifically possible weapons transfers and uninhibited return of exiled extremist leaders and terrorists. As of October 18, 2006, Israel has discovered 20 tunnels used for illegal arms smuggling under the border of the Gaza Strip and Egypt. Israel had said it would withdraw from the Strip and end the operation as soon as Shalit was released. The Palestinians had said that they were willing to return Shalit in exchange for the release of some of the Palestinians held in Israeli jails. The Palestinians and others have also said the assault was aimed at toppling the democratically elected Hamas-led government and at destabilizing the Palestinian National Authority, citing the targeting of civilian infrastructure such as a power station and the captures of government and parliament members. Some 300 Palestinians had been targeted by the IDF in the Gaza Strip since the kidnapping of Corporal Gilad Shalit. In July 2006, first reports emerged about mystery injuries after Israeli attacks. Previously unseen injuries included severely damaged internal organs, severe internal burning and deep internal wounds often resulting in amputations or death. Bodies arrived severely fragmented, melted and disfigured. There were speculations about a new experimental weapon, particularly dense inert metal explosives, DIMEs. Attempting to curb Qassam rocket attacks fired at southern Israel by Palestinian militants from the northern Gaza Strip. Israel launched Operation Autumn Clouds on November 1, 2006. On November 8, 2006, a day after Israel's withdrawal following Operation Autumn Clouds, Israel Defense Forces shells missed their target possibly due to a technical malfunction and hit a row of houses in the Gaza Strip town of Beit Hanun, killing 19 Palestinians and wounding more than 40. Israeli Defense Forces launched an investigation into the Beit Hanun November 2006 incident, and later apologized for the incident, and the then Israeli President Ehud Olmert offered humanitarian assistance to those affected. The 2006 Franco-Italian-Spanish Middle East peace plan was proposed after Israel invaded the Gaza Strip in Operation Autumn Clouds by Spanish Premier José Luis Rodríguez Zapatero during talks with French President Jacques Chirac. Italy's Prime Minister Romano Prodi gave his full support to the plan. On 26 November, a ceasefire was signed by Palestinian organizations and Israel withdrew its troops while the Palestinian Authority forces deployed to stop Qassam rocket launchings. Following the truce, over 60 Qassam rockets were fired from the Gaza Strip at Israel, and one Palestinian, armed with guns and grenades, was killed by the IDF. On 19 December, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad began taking open responsibility for the Qassam rocket firing, because they said Israel killed 2 of their members in Jenin. Fatah-Hamas conflict and Israeli blockade. A series of battles between Palestinian militants and Hamas govern Gaza and the Israel Defense Forces, IDF, that began in mid-May 2007, with the inter-Palestinian violence flaring in the meantime. Palestinians fired more than 220 Qassam rocket attacks on Israel, Sderot and the western Negev, in more than a week. The Israeli Air Force fired missiles and bombs at the launching sites. The fighting came amid serious Palestinian factional violence and reports of growing level of humanitarian crisis in the region. Hamas said they will continue to retaliate against Israeli strikes. In September 2007, citing an intensification of Qassam rocket attacks, Israel declared Gaza hostile territory. The declaration allowed Israel to prevent the transfer of electricity, fuel, and other supplies into Gaza. The stated purpose of this blockade was to pressure Hamas into ending the rocket attacks and to deprive them of the supplies necessary for the continuation of rocket attacks. Israel's decision to cut fuel supplies to Gaza were widely condemned as collective punishment. Israel has also arrested Hamas officials in the West Bank, including 2 cabinet members. Such arrests have been strongly condemned by international organizations and politicians. By January 2008, according to a United Nations study, the economic effects of Israel's blockade on Gaza reached a critical threshold. Finally, on January 17, 2008, Israel sealed the border completely following a rise in rocket attacks. The breach of the Gaza-Egypt border began on January 23, 2008, after gunmen in the Gaza Strip set off an explosion near the Rafah border crossing, destroying part of the former Israeli Gaza Strip area. The United Nations estimates that as many as half the 1.5 million population of the Gaza Strip crossed the border into Egypt seeking food and supplies. Operation Hot Winter. On February 27, 2008, Palestinian militants fired more than 40 Qassam rockets into southern Israel, and the Israeli army fired 3 missiles at the Palestinian Interior Ministry in Gaza, destroying the building. On February 28, 2008, Israeli aircraft bombed a police station near the Gaza City home of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, killing several children. The Israeli military says its air and ground operations against militants firing rockets from northern Gaza have hit at least 23 armed Palestinians, while Palestinian sources have reported higher death tolls and say many civilians have also been killed. Israel began its air and ground operations on 29 February. The IDF's offensive in Gaza has killed more than 100 Palestinians in less than a week. Palestinians fired 150 rockets at Israel, which killed 3 Israelis. The United States called for an end to clashes between Israel and the Palestinians. The Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, has accused Israel of international terrorism, saying its assault on Gaza constitutes more than a Holocaust. On 3 March, Abbas suspended all contact with Israel over its assault on Gaza as the Israeli government sent warplanes to hit more targets early on Monday and vowed to continue its offensive. The European Union condemned what it called disproportionate use of force by the Israeli military in Gaza after 54 Palestinians were killed in the highest casualty toll for a single day since fighting erupted in 2000. United Nations Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon also issued a condemnation of what he termed Israel's excessive and disproportionate response, and called on Israel to cease such attacks, while denouncing the ongoing rocket attacks on Sderot and Ashkelon. In the Muslim world, demonstrators took to the streets to protest the IDF attacks. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei called on Muslims to rise up and their leaders to hit Israel in the face with their nation's anger. In Lebanon, hundreds of Hezbollah supporters gathered at the Fatima Gate at the border between Lebanon and Israel, shouting "Death to Israel" and waving Lebanese and Palestinian flags. In Egypt, thousands of students held protests at universities across the country calling on Arab leaders to stop Israeli aggression and support the Palestinians. Some protesters burned Israeli and American flags. About 10,000 protesters, mainly from Jordan's mainstream Muslim Brotherhood and smaller opposition groups, took to the streets in one of the country's most vocal and largest anti-Israeli demonstrations in recent years. Saudi Arabia meanwhile compared the IDF offensive to Nazi war crimes and called on the international community to stop what it called the mass killings of Palestinians. Turkey's Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdogan said that the IDF attacks can have no humanitarian justification and added that Israel was rejecting a diplomatic solution to the dispute. Most Israeli tanks and troops pulled out of northern Gaza March 3, 2008. And an Israel Defense Forces spokesman confirmed that the Israeli military was ending offensive operations there after 5 days. On February 29, 2008, the Israeli military launched Operation Hot Winter, also called Operation Warm Winter, in response to Qassam rockets fired from the Strip by Hamas. The Israeli army killed 112 Palestinians, and Palestinian militants killed 3 Israelis. More than 150 Palestinians and 7 Israelis have been injured. There was widespread international alarm at the scale of the operation, with the U.S. State Department encouraging Israel to exercise caution to avoid the loss of innocent life, and the European Union and the United Nations criticizing Israel's disproportionate use of force. The European Union also demanded an immediate end to Palestinian militant rocket attacks on Israel and urged Israel to halt activities that endanger civilians, saying they were in violation of international law. 2008 Israel-Hamas ceasefire. The 2008 Israel-Hamas ceasefire was an Egyptian-brokered 6-month tadia, an Arabic term for a lull, for the Gaza area, which went into effect between Hamas and Israel on June 19, 2008. Hamas' obligation was to stop the rocket attacks on Israel. During the initial 5 months of the ceasefire, and after a shaky start during the initial week, these attacks from Gaza decreased significantly for a total of 19 rocket and 18 mortar shell launchings, compared to 1,199 rockets and 1,072 mortar shells in 2008 up to 19 June, a reduction of 98%. Mark Regev, spokesman for the Israeli Prime Minister, acknowledged that there were no Hamas rockets during the ceasefire before November 4. Israel's obligation was to cease attacks on Gaza and, once the ceasefire held, to gradually begin to ease its punishing blockade of Gaza. The agreement called on Israel to increase the level of goods entering Gaza by 30% over the pre-lull period within 72 hours and to open all border crossings and allow the transfer of all goods that were banned and restricted to go into Gaza within 13 days after the beginning of the ceasefire. The increase in supplies of food, water, medicine and fuel did improve, but the increase was only to an average of about 20% of normal levels, compared to the Hamas compliance in reducing rocket fire by 98%. 2 months later, the volume of goods arriving was too low to significantly improve living conditions, preventing UNRWA from replenishing its stores. Israel told U.S. officials in 2008 it would keep Gaza's economy on the brink of collapse. On November 4, 2008, Israel broke the ceasefire with an attack on Gaza. The Israeli military claimed the target of the raid was a tunnel that they said Hamas was planning to use to capture Israeli soldiers positioned on the border fence 250 meters away. Hamas officials differed, however, claiming that the tunnel was being dug for defensive purposes, not to capture IDF personnel, according to Dr. Robert Pastor, of the Carter Institute, and an IDF official confirmed that fact to him. Hamas replied to the Israeli attack with a barrage of rocket fire. With this incursion into Gaza territory and its non-compliance with the easing of the embargo, Israel had failed to comply with 2 aspects of the June 2008 ceasefire. When the 6-month truce officially expired on December 19, Hamas launched 50 to more than 70 rockets and mortars into Israel over the next 3 days, though no Israelis were injured. On December 21, Hamas said it was ready to stop the attacks and renew the truce if Israel stopped its aggression in Gaza and opened up its border crossings. On December 27 and 28, Israel implemented Operation Cast Lead against Hamas. Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak said, "We warned Hamas repeatedly that rejecting the truce would push Israel to aggression against Gaza." Gaza War, 2008-09. The Gaza War started when Israel launched a large military campaign in the Gaza Strip on December 27, 2008, codenamed Operation Cast Lead, Hebrew, with a stated aim of stopping Hamas rocket attacks on southern Israel and arms smuggling into Gaza. The conflict has also been called the Gaza Massacre in the Arab world, Arabic. A fragile 6-month truce between Hamas and Israel expired on December 19, 2008. The Israeli operation began with an intense bombardment of the Gaza Strip, targeting Hamas bases, police training camps, police headquarters and offices. Civilian infrastructure, including mosques, houses, medical facilities and schools, were also attacked, as Israel stated that many of them were used by combatants, and as storage spaces for weapons and rockets. Hamas intensified its rocket and mortar attacks against targets in Israel throughout the conflict, hitting previously untargeted cities such as Beersheba and Ashdod. On January 3, 2009, the Israeli ground invasion began. Human rights groups and aid organizations have accused Hamas and Israel of war crimes. An estimated 1,166 to 1,417 Palestinians and 13 Israelis died in the conflict. The conflict came to an end on 18 January after first Israel and then Hamas announced unilateral ceasefires. On 21 January, Israel completed its withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. On 2 March, it was reported that international donors had pledged $4.5 billion in aid for the Palestinians, mainly for rebuilding Gaza after Israel's offensive. This war is considered to be the largest, devastating and deadliest military operation in Gaza since the Six-Day War in 1967. March 2010 events. On March 26, 2010, 2 Israeli soldiers and 2 Hamas militants were killed during clashes on the Gaza Strip's southern border. 2 other soldiers were wounded during the fighting which broke out east of the town of Khan Younis. They are the first Israeli soldiers to have been killed in hostile fire in or around Gaza since Israel's major offensive there in January 2009, according to the BBC. 2011 cross-border attack. On August 18, 2011, a series of cross-border attacks was carried out in southern Israel near the Egyptian border, by a squad of militants. The militants first opened fire at civilian bus. Several minutes later, a bomb was detonated next to an Israeli army patrol along Israel's border with Egypt. In a third attack, an anti-tank missile hit a private vehicle, killing 4 civilians. Operation Returning Echo. During the second week of March 2012, Israeli Defense Forces, IDF, initiated Operation Returning Echo. It was the worst outbreak of violence covered by the media in the region since the 2008-09 Operation Cast Lead, the Gaza War. Operation Pillar of Defense. Attacks by Israel and Gazans grew intense late in October 2012. An Israeli airstrike killed Ahmed Jabari, chief of the Hamas military wing in Gaza. During the operation, 4 Israeli civilians and 1 soldier were killed by Palestinian rocket fire. According to Palestinian Center for Human Rights, 158 Palestinians had been killed, of which 102 were civilians, 55 militants and 1 was policemen. 30 children and 13 women were among the killed, while the Israel Defense Forces presented statistics showing that out of 177 Palestinians killed, 120 were militants. Most of the fighting was by bombs, aerial attacks, artillery, and rockets, the rockets being primarily used by the Palestinians and airstrikes primarily by the Israelis. Attacked locations include Beersheba, Tel Aviv, Ashdod, Ofakim, Gaza, the rest of the Gaza Strip, the Shar HaNejv, and Eshkol Regional Council. The United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Germany and other Western countries expressed support for Israel's right to defend itself, and/or condemned the Palestinian rocket attacks on Israel. Iran, Egypt, Turkey, North Korea and several other Arab and Muslim countries condemned the Israeli operation. 2014 Gaza War. In 2014, fighting intensified between Israel and Hamas, leading to another full-scale Gaza war, this one far deadlier than the previous in 2008 to 2009. The IDF launched Operation Protective Edge on July 8, 2014, in response to Hamas rocket attacks, which were launched following an earlier Israeli airstrike against Gaza, and on July 17, 2014, Israel troops entered the Gaza Strip. UN OCHA says 2,205 Palestinians, including at least 1,483 civilians, and 71 Israelis, including 66 soldiers, and 1 foreign national in Israel were killed in the conflict. The war came to an end after 50 days of conflict when a ceasefire was agreed upon on August 26, 2014. 2018 border protest. During the 2018 Land Day protests, 168 Palestinians have been killed and thousands were injured during clashes with Israeli troops at the Gaza-Israel border. Clashes in November. Violence flared up again on November 11, 2018 when 7 Palestinian militants were killed during a botched raid by the Israel Defense Forces in the southeastern Gaza Strip. 1 IDF officer was killed and another was injured. Over a dozen rockets were subsequently fired from Gaza, 3 of which were shot down. After a series of intense fire exchanges, ceasefire was agreed upon on November 13, 2018.